Well. Casey, welcome to the Pilot Money Gal and Guys. Today, we're excited to have you on. It's an honor to have you on the show. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
This is good stuff. We've got, for our listeners, KC Campbell is a retired Air Force colonel, of course, an A-10 combat pilot, group commander, and recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross with Combat Valor for her actions over Baghdad and southern Iraq, flying the A-10 in 2003. That medal, which she's got a book coming out, which we're going to get to in depth, but in the back of the book, it talks all about the medal. But that medal is given to those that distinguish themselves by single acts of heroism or extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight. Both heroism and extraordinary achievement are entirely distinctive, involving operations that are not routine. You're a wife, got 2 kids, and a managing director at Victory Strategies. It seems like you got a lot going on, Casey. Very, very decorated, obviously, in the Air Force. A distinguished graduate from the prestigious Air Force Academy. I remember you way back when you were Kim Reed at that time. I had to memorize your name because you were the cadet wing commander in 1997, I think, second semester, if memory serves. And your book is fantastic. It really is a fantastic book. You're gracious enough to let us have an advanced copy there in early access. And it was just pure pleasure reading it, I got to say. It's for any pilot or leader. It's not just about your Iraq experience, but about being a military pilot, which was just fascinating. Even as a military pilot, I thought it was fascinating. And the preparation and resolve it takes to do that correctly. It's insightful from beginning to end. And for, again, any pilot, aviator, wannabe pilot, leader, or anyone wants to be a leader, as well as anyone interested in attending the Air Force Academy and being a man or woman, and anyone interested in being a military pilot. I thought it was just fantastic. So,
Charlie, that's so good to hear. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I really did. Yeah, it was fantastic.
It was fun. I enjoyed, KC, learning about your early years too, as it prepared you and your desire then to go to the academy. And by the way, the book is Flying in the Face of Fear, a fighter pilot's lessons on leading with courage. And I just love your story of leading up to that. Your father was at the academy and you had this tremendous desire. So I'd love to hear more, KC, about what do you think sparked your in early childhood? And you may have mentioned in your book, I think it was, that the Challenger space shuttle was impactful to you, but I'm not sure that that's exactly what sparked it. But what do you think? I mean, what in your early childhood, you got a hold of something and you got passionate about it, didn't you?
Yeah, I honestly think it really dates back to the Challenger launch. And for whatever reason, watching the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger, I think many of us probably remember exactly where we were when that happened. And for me, it was just this shift of seeing the astronauts. Obviously, it ended up in a tragedy, but seeing these astronauts so committed to something that they knew that they could die doing what they love to do, knowing that it was something more important than themselves. There was something that just connected on that. And granted, I was in 5th grade, so we can put the date out there, but I was pretty young, right? Like, to have that kind of realization in 5th grade, thankful that I had parents who talked me through it and kind of asked me about what I was thinking and what I was going through, but I really connected with it. And then there was this idea of this thrill of flight. And there was something for me in that moment. I realized that I wanted to, initially my goal was to be an astronaut, and talking to my parents about how do I get there. My dad said, well, a lot of the pilots that fly the space shuttle are fighter pilots, and a lot of them have gone to the Air Force Academy. And it was like that flipped a switch for me. From then on out, I was going to the Air Force Academy and I was going to be a fighter pilot.
I know you started off in the Civil Air Patrol.
I did, yeah. So, once I decided that I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy, I mean, setting that goal is the first part, right? But then you actually have to do the work to get there. And I poured everything I had into it. And these young cadets in an Air Force uniform that looked about my age showed up at my middle school, and I realized that I could actually get a little bit of a head start. And when they said I also got to fly, I was like, oh, well, then yes, I'm in, count me in. So I got my first flight in a Cessna as a young Civil Air Patrol cadet, and then went on as a request for a 16th birthday gift to do a little bit of flying. And so I was able to solo a Cessna then ended up being about age 17. But that was really where I got my start, just knowing that I had this goal that I wanted to go after, to go to the Air Force Academy with the goal of being a fighter pilot. I just knew that I had to do the work to get there. And thankfully I had a lot of people around me to support me and encourage me in doing that.
And it sounds like that experience just resonates with a lot of us, because it sounds very similar to a lot of pilot stories we've heard, starting out, at least how they get started. But you go from there, obviously Air Force Academy, pilot training, A-10 training. And then if you would share with our listeners the story and the experience you had over Iraq. I'm sure they're somewhat familiar with it. I was flying in Iraq about the same time, so we got briefings about it. But if you can kind of give the summary of it, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, you bet. It's those, never did I imagine. I don't think anybody ever could have imagined those situations that you can find yourself in. And I think, everything leading up to that moment over Baghdad prepared me for that experience. But I don't think you can ever imagine you don't know when you're going to be called upon, right, to execute at your highest level, to where everything that you've done at this point has to come together. And for me, that happened on April 7th, back in 2003. So early days of Operation Iraqi Freedom. By this point on the ground, all our ground troops had pushed towards Baghdad, both the Army and Marines, kind of in their separate push, culminating in Baghdad. And the calls for close air support were just becoming very intense. There were a lot of troops in contact, a lot of things going on. So we designed a plan to have aircraft just fly up to Baghdad, air refuel, and then wait for this tasking, so that we're ready no matter what happens. We got there, the weather was terrible. We barely were able to get gas. We struggled to find the tanker to refuel. And then my flight lead was like, I'm not even sure we're going to be able to do anything today because the weather is so terrible. And I feel like a few minutes after that, we just got this call over the radio that said our ground troops were taking fire. They needed immediate assistance. And now our perspective totally changes, right? Because they need our help. We need to get in there quickly, and we're going to do everything we can. So despite the weather, my flight lead said, look, we're going to go right over the target area. We'll find a hole in the clouds and we'll just make our way down.
Was that the first time you'd had a troops in contact call, or had you had that previously, but
No,
not
that
obviously
was
as
the
intense?
first. That was definitely the first troops in contact. So
It
I
was,
had
wow.
close air support where I had dropped weapons, but not a troops in contact. And so it's surreal a little bit, because it's everything that we train for. It's everything that we talk about. This is the important moment. And so I think even, as that call comes in, my adrenaline is going, I know it's, the time is now to perform at your
Yeah.
highest level. But I remember my flight lead just dropping through the clouds, and all of a sudden he's gone and I'm above the clouds by myself. And then he says, all right, Casey, you can come down below the weather. So I just kind of looked down, found a hole in the clouds and dove through, not really sure what I would find when I got there, and not really sure how low we would be. My flight lead gave me a little bit of an update as I was making my way down below the weather, but I'll tell you, it was totally eye-opening to drop down below the clouds and see a firefight. Like, we were low enough that I could see tracers and smoke. And I mean, it was very surreal. It's kind of the way I explain it. I mean, it was just everything that you think about in terms of a firefight. We thankfully had a very clear description of what was happening. Our friendly troops were on the west side of the river. They were kind of hunkered down awaiting resupply. And then the enemy, Iraqi Republican Guard, were on the east side firing rocket-propelled grenades into our troops. You don't always get a nice big river like the Tigris River that delineate between friendly and enemy, but we at least had that going for us. But to see the tracers and the smoke, it was very, very eye-opening. And then we're talking about what we're going to do. My flight lead says, all right, we're going to get set up. We're going to use guns first. And then about this time, I start to see like puffs of these gray and white smoke, and then a bright flash right next to my cockpit. And it was this realization that not only is there this firefight happening now across the river, but now the enemy is shooting up at you too. So Yeah, it was eye-opening. I don't know. I'm trying to think of the right word, but it was just all of a sudden like, this is what you train for, this is what you plan for, and you have to be ready.
Yeah. The first
Go
time
ahead.
I got shot at, it was surreal. I almost felt like it was a dream. I was like, is this really happening? This is going on. I guess we
That's
better
kind
do
of,
what we need to do.
it is like, and I know, I mean, I think your brain moves really fast. So there's those moments of like, is that really what I think it is? You know, they're
Yeah, yeah.
actually shooting at me. And then it's like, okay, but you're still flying the airplane, you're still doing all of those things, but it's that we talked about what this looks
Yeah.
like, and then to actually see it, I think, you know, leading up to this point, I didn't think I had been shot at all, right? It was daytime. I didn't really notice anything. After this mission, I flew at night and I realized they're shooting at us all the time. It was like fireworks display at night, but you just didn't see it during the day.
Yeah.
So, yeah, eye-opening, I think is the best way to describe it.
Wow. So you
So
guys you got the enemy on the east side, good guys on the west side, and you pop down below the clouds.
yeah, I mean, that's all we could do. I mean, at the time we're flying the A-10A model, which is a lot different than the C model, but still in the troops in contact situation, you're going to get down below the weather. So you can identify both the friendly location and enemy location. Make sure you know where everybody's at before you employ ordnance. So that was our plan. We were going to do guns and rockets. Our target was actually the enemy that was hiding underneath what we called the North Baghdad Bridge. So we knew we had to get pretty low to get our nose underneath the bridge to use our forward firing. But because we were so low, we were also really heavy. We were full of ordnance, full of gas, and we decided we would just do a couple passes and then kind of climb up, reassess, just because of the high threat situation. We did 2 passes each, guns and rockets, and then, you know, hindsight, right? 1 pass too many. Coming off on my last pass, just trying to get my energy back, climbing up, and that's when I felt this huge explosion at the back of the airplane. And there was no doubt in my mind. Like, I knew immediately I had been hit. The airplane dumped over. I remember looking down at Baghdad below. Again, kind of time slows down. I remember like looking down, seeing Baghdad getting closer, this realization that I might have to eject, because I remember pulling back on the control stick and nothing happened. It didn't respond. And I think I remember looking down at those ejection handles, just thinking like, this will not go well if I have to eject over Baghdad. And so it was just that, it was like that flip the switch moment of, now I'm going to do everything that I can, everything that they train us to do, right? Maintain aircraft control. Well, I can't. I'm doing the best I can. Analyze the situation. So now I'm trying to figure out what is going on. You know, why can't I control the airplane? I remember just flashing master caution light, our caution panel, which is over on the right side of the cockpit, lit up like a Christmas tree. So many lights on. But I remember like my eyes going to the very top, which is where our hydraulic lights are, and the left and right side where both lights were on, both the pressure and the reservoir levels were on. And right above that is our hydraulic gauges. I remember looking up at those and they were both at 0. So it made it pretty easy to analyze what was going on, is that when that missile impacted, it dumped all the hydraulics out of my airplane. Not good situation. At this point, I know I either am going to eject or I'm hoping that this backup emergency system works. And thankfully it did. I flipped the switch. It's called manual reversion, and I could actually now pull back on the stick and start to climb. So that's the first moment I thought like, okay, I might actually make it out of here.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
just fascinating. I've obviously listened to your story and read about it now several times, but what fascinated me, and we all talk about maintaining aircraft control, but just like you said, you couldn't maintain aircraft control. So you had to switch to analyze the situation.
Yeah.
And then go back to maintain aircraft control and still analyze the situation and take appropriate actions. And you had to keep that loop going, I mean, for a very long time until you got back to be able to land.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of a continuous of figure out what's going on, because that was just the first step, right? Of, okay, I analyze the situation. I know I've lost hydraulics. The proper action at that point is either ejecting or going into the backup system. So I've got that going on. But now once I actually get control of the airplane and get out of Baghdad, it's like, now I got to start over, because what actually is wrong with the airplane? I mean, I knew I didn't have hydraulics, but I didn't know at that point what else was wrong. I mean, it was just, I only had brain bites for so much, right?
Sure.
So it was, okay, get immediate control of the airplane, get out of Baghdad, and now take a breath and reassess and figure out what actually happened, what's wrong with the airplane, what works, what doesn't work, and where do I go from here?
Wow. KC, I love yeah, I think it was in your book you talked about the teamwork that went on there
Yeah,
between you and your flight lead. And because you've got brain bites, you're trying to survive in this moment, and your flight lead comes in and says, "Hey, chaff flare, head to
yeah.
friendly territory." I mean, that was to me a really cool example of what it's supposed to look like, and that was
Yes.
really
It was
neat.
huge. I mean, we talk about wingman concept all the time. They teach us at the Air Force Academy, right? It's all in the Top Gun movies. Never leave your wingman behind, right? But what does it truly mean to be a wingman? And I think that moment over Baghdad was very a very good example of what a good wingman can do. It also long term made me realize I think we sometimes focus on the individual and what they have to do in emergency, but it's so important of that how that mutual support is with a wingman or a co-pilot, right? We don't have that in the A-10, but that back and forth mutual support is just as critical as what the person in the airplane does with the emergency. And I think back to that. I mean, my brain bites were all about controlling the airplane. How do I maintain control of the airplane? Meanwhile, he is very aware that the enemy is still shooting at us. So that's why he's telling me, he's telling me chaff flare, chaff flare. We're not having a conversation. He's being very directive over the radio, chaff flare, so that I will put out more countermeasures so that I don't get hit again. When I mean, my communication with him is not very good on my end. I mean, it's very concise, probably too concise to, I think he gets enough of what's going on because he tells me to do something and all I say is I can't. Like I can't. He's telling me to go west because he wants me to be over the friendly location because that is some chance of survival. If I have to eject, at least my parachute might float down over the friendlies. But that is awareness I did not have at all. I mean, I did not have the situational awareness for that, but he did, right? He saw that bigger picture. And then as soon as I say I'm in manual reversion, it clicks for him. Like he knows how serious this situation is. And that's when he tells me to emergency jettison everything off the airplane, all the heavy stuff that's keeping me from climbing. He says emergency jettison. And, those actions, I think, kept me safe. They helped me survive. And, it's such a good example of, we talk so much about what being a good wingman is, and that was 100% it.
There's so many layers to emergencies,
Yeah.
particularly one in combat. I can't even imagine going through something like that. But you have that emergency going on. You have to weigh, hey, I might have to eject over enemy enemy troops that obviously you just shot at, so they're not going to be too happy. Obviously, that's weighing on your mind.
Yeah.
And then you've got the plane that's in manual reversion. A lot going on just in a matter of seconds, but you get through with that. Even once you get the plane flying again, I mean, you're not out of the woods because you're in manual reversion flying an A-10 single seat aircraft quite a distance.
Yeah. It was almost like the hard part was still to come, quite
Yeah.
honestly. I mean, there was that immediate moment of having to act quickly to survive. But then there was this long drug out hour. It was roughly an hour back from Baghdad to Kuwait in an A-10, 300 miles. So it was
That had
about
to
an
felt
hour.
like 10 hours, I'd imagine. I don't know.
It was the longest hour of my life. I mean, it was just physically, mentally, just there was so much going on. I had to, maintain this high level of performance. Meanwhile, my mind is racing because manual reversion is something that we train once for in our early pilot training days, or just to get a feel for how the airplane responds. A-10 training, not pilot training, but we do it once and it's like, okay, that was hard. Let's not do that again. And then we don't actually train to land in manual reversion. So that was a lot of times we had talked about it. Like if you end up in that situation, the most likely scenarios that you would eject. So all of these things are going on in my mind. And so I know that I have to make this decision, right? Am I going to land? Am I going to try to land it? Or am I going to just get it back to friendly territory and eject? I'll be honest, like it's really hard to stay focused for an hour. And so of course my mind starts wandering to all these places of like, what if I crash? What if I die? You know, all these terrible things. And I just, thankfully, again, my flight lead is there to have, you know, we're having conversations. He's trying to keep me focused by going through different emergency procedures, but it is also very hard for me personally to just compartmentalize, right? Like I just have to get those thoughts out of my mind, really just focus on the task at hand. But it was hard. That was a long hour.
And so you fly that hour back, and then you still have to land in manual reversion. I mean, obviously a lot was going through your mind, but I know you talked about in the book, and you guys got to go read this book. It's fascinating. And it's not just about this incident too, but I know your flight lead gave you carte blanche, obviously wasn't going to make the decision for you to eject or land the aircraft. Either one, you know, he had your back, which was comforting. I know you said, but what a
comforting and terrifying, right? Because now it's my decision, right? And it's, what decision do I make? I think the fact that he had that much confidence and trust in me was awesome. I mean, it was so reassuring. But now I know 100%, right? It's on me and it's my decision. I took a long time to think through the decision. And, you know, I just really went through the whole way back. We went through multiple emergency procedures, went through multiple checklists, just trying to really make sure we knew what was wrong with the airplane. Without the hydraulics, I couldn't get my gear down normally. I didn't have braking. I didn't have speed brakes to slow me down. All of these things weren't working. And so trying to figure out, okay, how can we do this successfully? We eventually, when we made it back into friendly territory, we decided to do the controllability check, which meant slowing down, trying to get my gear down, which thankfully, again, another procedure, we have a backup procedure for this as well, but waiting for the gear to come down felt like an eternity to see those 3 green lights that are like gear down and locked. But we did that controllability check, got the gear down. The airplane is now flying, in my view, fairly well for the damage. And so I just, at that point, felt comfortable that I could land the airplane. I felt confident too. I felt like it was the right decision. I was still nervous about it, but I felt very confident based on having flown the airplane for an hour, really got a feel for how it was flying, knowing that I could also eject at the last second.
KC, just for those of us that don't know manual reversion in the A10 anyway, it probably was just like is it just massive stick forces that you're trying to fight against because there's no pneumatics or whatever helping you out with the flight controls? Is that kind of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's it takes away all the ease of flying, right? With hydraulics. So without hydraulics, it is really just cranks and cables. I kind of equate it to like old school flying. Keep in mind, this is a 47,000 pound airplane. So it's a heavy stick. And the one thing when I emergency jettisoned all my ordnance, I had this one hardwired electronic countermeasure pod out on the very left wing. And so if I let go of the stick, the airplane just wanted to roll. So the whole way back, I was fighting that.
Gotcha.
Thankfully, I had heard about flying in manual reversion from some of the pilots that had flown in Desert Storm and had sustained battle damage. And they talked about flying with your right hand on the stick, your left hand on the stick, both hands on the stick, just so that you didn't get exhausted flying back. And so all those, I'm such an advocate for telling stories and experiences because I think it helps other people. I mean, I had no idea when I heard those stories, when I read about those stories in books, that I would need them later. But I was aware of it, and I think it helped me on the way home for sure.
I can't, the whole story is fascinating. Your first troops in contact, you drop below, you got weather out there, you drop below, you're shooting at people and dropping your ordnance on folks, and then you get shot. You have to deal with manual reversion. I can't imagine your adrenaline had to have been at the peak it ever has been. And then flying back, trying to do all that with a super heavy plane. The physical exhaustion of that had to have been just extreme.
Yeah. I think it took me a long time to come down from this. I mean, getting the airplane on the ground was such a huge sense of relief. I mean, just to be on the ground and know that I had made it. And I did feel like a huge, just weight. It was almost like this, I don't know. It was just like I'm okay. Like I'm going to live is really what it was. Because before that I didn't know. And so having that relief, which seems like such an understated word, but there was definitely like adrenaline in that moment. And I think I was just such on an adrenaline high until like, because people are talking about it, we're debriefing. I mean, we're doing all the normal stuff we do after we landed. I'm debriefing with intel, then I'm debriefing with our flight, and then I'm debriefing the senior leadership on base, and then it's just, I was constantly go, go, go. And then it was kind of the end of the day, where I finally just went and just kind of like sat down and was like, what the hell just happened? This reality check.
Yeah, and I remember on final there, you the wing dipped at some point. And you, I don't know what that you assessed that as, but there was a point. It wasn't just all smooth.
Oh no,
smooth approach after that. It was, there's some hairy moments in there.
Yeah, our checklist talks about this ground effect. When you get into ground effects, sometimes manual reversion can create some issues, and it did. I mean, as soon as I got into ground effect, just above the runway, I thought the airplane was going to flip over on its back, and that would not have gone well. So, but thankfully, just quickly yank the stick back, airplane levels out, and then was able to put it on the ground. And what I call the best landing I've ever done.
Heck yeah.
Well,
safe.
KC, at least after all the debriefings and whatnot, you come down, and then you get to go fly a CSAR mission the next day.
Yeah, no, I mean, that wasn't planned. I think the intent was it's an alert, like generally on an alert mission, it's relaxed, it's calm, you catch up on sleep, you read, you do all those things. You're still hanging out in the alert shack next to the runway. And then the alarm sounded. I mean, an A-10 pilot had been shot down in Baghdad, and I didn't have time to think about it. We just raced out to the jets as fast as we could. We started gathering information, where is the pilot, what shot him down, what's his condition, where are the closest rescue helicopters. We're on, it's the adrenaline, right? We're just going. I'm not even thinking about it. The truth is it didn't matter, right? Because those rescue pilots were there for me the day before. And so I knew 100% I was going to do the same for this pilot.
Wow.
We only made it about 30 minutes into Iraq because by some miracle, this pilot got picked up by friendly ground forces.
Wow.
So he was really lucky, but we were told to turn around, which took us a bit. It's hard to tell A-10 pilots to turn around when there's another pilot on the ground, and they finally told us that he had been picked up. But we turned around and came back. And, I think for me, it was like, I knew those guys were there for me the day before. I was going to do the same for them. It just, that's what we do. I mean, I was so focused on that. I didn't have time to think about it. And looking back, it was a good way to get back in the jet again. Not that it was good that somebody got shot down, but it was good for me to just get back in the airplane, get back in the mission, get back in the mindset, and not think about kind of all those worst case scenarios.
Yeah. Wow.
That's fascinating. We've talked on the show before about the books On Combat and On Killing, which obviously are some pretty good books for folks in the military, but it talks about how, police officers and airline pilots, something like that happens, you're immediately off duty. You're going to be off of flying and off of, duty for the police officers for a very long time, maybe months. And you're going to talk, at least in the police officer world, you'd go talk to a psychologist or psychiatrist or one of those two. And, in the flying world, you got all kinds of different resources you can call, and at least in the airline world, to talk through those scenarios.
Yeah.
But that's what makes, being a military pilot so unique. The next day you're up flying a mission and get called. That's just, it's a different world that I think any insight into it, you can kind of help it. Yeah. And you're a fantastic storyteller. That's the other thing with this book is the stories that go along, were just great. I mean, all the way from the academy experiences and on through. I got to tell you, I almost cried when you're talking about getting your prop of wings from your dad there a couple times.
I'm pretty sure I did then too. So, I think what's interesting is I think if this had happened in training where I had some sort of malfunction or damage and landed in manual reversion, it's even hard to put it in that context, but I think in a training environment, we have, when you have an emergency, if it's pretty significant or if there's a fatality involved, I think then all those things that you're talking about come into play, right? You're down. There's no pressure. There's no push for you to get back in the airplane. It's just talk to the people you need to talk to. But I think in combat, I think my squadron commander, who was my flight lead that day, I think he was doing everything that he thought he should do in terms of like, we're going to have a down day. We're going to sit alert. We're going to relax. I'm going to just let her chill.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's what the intent was. It just didn't turn out that way.
No.
But we've come a long way, right? And I think in 20 years, I don't know that there was anybody there on base that I even could have talked to about it.
Mhm.
I think for me, what I did was I compartmentalized it all. Like I just tucked it away. Like I didn't deal with it then. I did write it down in a journal, which I'm very thankful for because I have my thoughts that night of everything that happened. But I didn't really talk about it in terms of like the reality of what could have happened. And so I knew there was a war going on. We needed every pilot we could get. I just totally focused on that and then compartmentalized the rest. I don't advocate as this being necessarily a healthy approach, by the way, but this is what I did. This is what worked for me. And then when I got home, I had the opportunity, my husband is also an A-10 pilot. So he was very aware of everything that had happened and he understood. And we thankfully had lots of conversations about this. And I guess if I look at the positive in it, it totally recaged me and refocused me on my life and kind of what was important and what I wanted to accomplish and where I wanted to set my priorities. So, I mean, I guess I try to look at the good in all of it.
Casey, I love what you said about, this event happened, but really everything in your life up to that point was preparing you for that, and as we transition to like the lessons learned and the leadership things that you talk about in your book, I mean, to me, that's the most amazing thing because I think it is our human nature to see an event and a person do well and go, oh, they did well during that one moment. But it was a lifetime of lessons that you had, your perseverance, your leadership already that really came through for you in that moment. And then after that, you took those lessons and continued to, my guess, Casey, is that had that event not happened to you, you would have still gone on to be the very successful person you are now, because everything in your life was kind of grooming you for that anyway. But the lessons learned on that one just kind of amplified everything, it seems like to me.
Yeah, I think it was truly life-changing in so many ways. I mean, from a personal perspective of helping me just set my priorities and know what's important and really figure out what I wanted in life. And then from a professional standpoint as well, like seeing the impact that a good wingman rate can have, that the whole concept of teamwork. I mean, there were so many people that had my back on that mission, everybody from my wingman to the rescue helicopters, to the crash recovery team, to the F-15s overhead that I didn't even know that were there. There were just so many people. Like the call went out and it was like, I've heard from guys on the ground, some special operators who were like, yeah, we heard that. And we started going right over to the location so that we could, if I got on the ground, they were going to come to get me. I mean, it was just that whole team concept and knowing that, the importance of people kind of having your back and providing mutual support. It was also the leadership piece of seeing my leaders in combat and seeing how they could inspire a team in really difficult times and help us to be better at doing these things and to keep us motivated and focused on the mission. I mean, there are just so many good things that came out of it and so many lessons that I think it really changed just my view on leadership, what I expected from a leader and how I wanted to be as a leader as well.
And Casey, kind of piling on there, what is it, if you can point to any, and your book's filled with, lessons learned throughout your life, but in particularly for some folks, anything at the Air Force Academy, maybe athletics. I know there's some stories about power women, anything that really, kind of is like, yeah, this is why I was in those critical moments where I couldn't maintain aircraft control. I had to analyze the situation. I was able to do that in the timely manner it took to save my life and save the aircraft.
I don't know if I could pinpoint it to one thing. I think, I've looked back at that moment and trying to figure out like over, 20 years of reflecting on it of why was I able to act quickly, make a decision, feel confident in that decision. And I think it comes down to things that, first off, I think every time you do something hard, it makes you better at doing hard things. And so I look back at like my time at the Air Force Academy, at pilot training, in A-10 training, all of those things I think prepared me for that moment. To me, it comes down to being prepared, right? Putting in the work, no matter what it is, but putting in the work, doing the homework. I mean, I knew my airplane inside and out. I knew what would happen when things failed. I did plenty of research on the enemy's threat systems as well. But you do your work, you put in the work. And then the practice for me was huge. Anytime I could chair fly before a mission. So during pilot training, during A-10 training, I would chair fly. You guys are familiar, but chair flying means sitting, well, at the time we were all sitting down in these chairs. We'd tape a picture of the cockpit on the wall and just think through critical steps as if you're in the cockpit. That was like my freebie mission. I got to think through all those critical steps. If there was something that I didn't know, I would look it up. If I'd practice my radio calls, but it was this idea of visualizing something before it happens. Whether it's a stressful situation, whatever it is, you can take the time to visualize, walk through, you name it. But that practice was huge for me. I did that in pilot training. I did it in A-10 training. I've used it in my world as a leader as well when I have to do hard things. So the preparation, the practice, and then I also think the thing that really helped, and I think this comes from flying, is planning for contingencies, right? We don't just talk about what happens when everything goes right on the mission. Mm-hmm. We take the time to talk through those worst case scenarios. I mean, you don't want to wallow there and stay there and all the bad things that can happen. But if you talk through them and you know what you will do when it happens, then it's like, I don't know, for me, it's like, now I can let it go. And I see this in my everyday life. When I'm worried about something, I think through it, I think about how I will react, and then I do my best to let it go. Sometimes easier said than done. But I think that combination of putting in the work, right? You got to do the work if you want to be successful, practicing so that you get good at it, you get comfortable with it, and then taking the time to think through those contingencies is really important. I think, to me, when I look back, I think that's probably why I was able to be successful in that moment.
There's so many parallels in the financial world that Charlie and I have, chair flying with clients on what their risk tolerance is.
What are the risks?
Do that. Yep.
We call some of our software like a simulator because we simulate these difficult circumstances.
That's so that
at least mentally, we've been through that before. But Casey, a lot of our audience and myself, Rob, currently in the airline industry, and I know that's not your industry per se, but again, these leadership principles apply everywhere.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking about what you might have to say to our audience, because it seems like it's kind of a difficult time. Now, I've been out of it a little bit, Rob, so jump in, but
I can tell by your beard.
Contract negotiations going on. We've had multiple close calls. There's been 3 of them lately that Rob and I will cover on another podcast, but man, it seems like it's just sometimes morale gets low. And I know there were times like that in the military too, where we just struggled. But, as a pilot on the flight deck, that's maybe just struggling a little bit. I mean, how can we apply these leadership principles that, I know that you've lived in your military career and as well? What do you think?
I think, when I look at this from a leadership perspective first, right? When I, as a leader, as a commander on my team, when I saw morale issues or things starting to not quite going as they should, kind of this, to me, those were flags. Those are flags. It's time to step in. It's time to do something. But that's from a leadership perspective. And I know that not everybody is in a position like that. But I also think there are things that we can do as individuals when we are on a team and we see those things happening around us. And I think sometimes we get so bogged down by all the things that are going on. Where I like to bring it back to is focus on those things that you can control. Where can you make a difference on your airplane, on your mission with your team? Can you what are those things that you can control? And then where else can you influence? Where can you raise ideas to leadership? Where can you submit feedback to leadership? Those are maybe areas where you can influence. Mm-hmm. And so I think sometimes we get so overwhelmed by all the things that are going wrong and we're concerned about them, but sometimes it's best to just bring it back in when we're our team member to just the things we can control and those things that we can influence. And the rest of it, leave it for later. Don't stress about it. Don't worry about it. Because you can't control or influence it.
Yeah, I think that, man, you hit the nail on the head, KC, because I think that's the struggle, Rob. I mean, at least when I was there, it was we can't control this on-time thing or all these things going on around us. There were so many more things that we wanted to influence, but maybe we couldn't. And so I love what you said, just taking stock of what do I have control over? Let's try to influence that. And maybe I can have a positive influence on someone around me when these things are tough. And right now, maybe in the cockpit, it's like, hey, let's just fly a safe airplane and be on high alert for that. And maybe that's the influence. I don't know, Rob, what do you think? It's difficult.
Yeah, that resonates so much with me is, just you can control what you can control, and everything else, you got to just kind of react to. And in the airline world, obviously I can control bringing crew coffee or, making sure that your crew is taken care of, just like in the military. So
yeah. And how you interact with passengers from a passenger standpoint, right?
absolutely.
If we're late and the pilot comes on the radio or over the sound system and is like, hey, I'm really sorry, here's kind of what's going on. Or if you're really late and they start walking down the aisles and talking to people and explaining weather. I had a pilot one time walk out and show, I understand weather and radar and how bad it can be, but he's like on his phone showing everybody like, this is why we're delayed, because we don't want to fly through this. And I mean, it's just how small is something like that, but can make a big difference. And so that's the focus on what you can control, like control your environment that you can control, where can you make a difference? And I think sometimes that just helps settle us a little bit and center us in terms of what's important.
Yeah, I love it. That's fantastic. Shifting gears here a little bit, if you can. Obviously, the Super Bowl just happened. KC doesn't stand for Kansas City, but there was an all-female flyby, or maybe it does now. Were you going for Kansas City?
That would be pretty awesome. No, unfortunately not. That's here on my couch.
Yeah. All-female flyby, Navy pilots. They couldn't get Air Force pilots, I guess. More expensive, I think. But they had all female flyby the Super Bowl. You talk in your book about power women. I've got a niece that's looking into being a pilot, and obviously you are a beacon for a lot of women out there. What's your message to them? What's your thoughts on all of that?
First off, I would say if flying or aviation or military or whatever it is, quite honestly, if there's a goal that you want to go after, then go for it, right? Even if it's like a community that there aren't a lot of women. And, when I decided that I wanted to be a fighter pilot, I had no idea that women weren't actually allowed to be fighter pilots. Like, I didn't realize that, thankfully. My parents didn't tell me that. They told me to work hard, go after what I wanted. But that term power women comes from a high school teacher of mine who just encouraged us to go after what we wanted. Like, it didn't matter if policy or procedure or whatever it was at the time. She was just like, if you want it, go after it. So I think one, that's really important to surround yourself with people who are encourage you, challenge you, support you. But I think it's such a, I have no regrets in terms of my life and the path that I took. Was it always easy? No. I mean, there was definitely challenging moments, but it's so worth it. And if it's something that you want, then go after it.
I love it. And talk about challenging moments. One of the great stories you have is getting rejected by the Air Force Academy. So you get rejected by the Air Force Academy, and then you become a distinguished graduate cadet wing commander, which is the highest rank you can have at the academy. I mean, if you want to talk about that, that'd be fascinating.
Well, I think for me, you work so hard at something, you're like, I felt like I had done everything I could to get in. And then I got that rejection letter in the mail, which was crushing. I mean, it was just like, what? I had just put everything I had into this. And I just decided to use that rejection as motivation, right? Of like, I'm going to prove to them that I belong, not just that I belong, but that I can excel here. And so I kind of took it and used it to use it as a bit of an opportunity to press myself, to work hard, and to have try to maintain a good attitude through it all, which is honestly the advice that I would give women as well, just in terms of, well, actually men and women. Anytime you want to go for something, work hard at it. You got to put in the work, you got to put in the work to be good at what you do, be credible. Having been the only female in many environments, it is all about, to me, credibility. Go work hard, put in the work, be credible at what you do, and the rest really doesn't matter. And I found that to be successful at the Air Force Academy, as a fighter pilot throughout my career. I just, when I got that rejection letter, the fact that I had people around me that said, if that's what you want, then keep up, don't go,
That's
don't
awesome.
quit, stay after it. And I had a liaison officer to the Air Force Academy who he knew that my SAT scores weren't spectacular.
Yeah.
And finally, I grew up in California and the ACT just wasn't a thing there. And finally, I found a location where I could take it. And I finally got a score that was competitive. But, it took just a little bit of encouragement and help. And then this idea of a letter writing campaign to the Air Force Academy just to say, hey, don't forget about me. I'm still interested. Was I don't know whether that worked or not. I got the acceptance letter very late, but I got it. And again, I just was like, all right, I got in. Now I got to prove that I belong here.
In your book, obviously very successful. Everyone knows that, but you have a theme of failing forward and how to do that. Any thoughts on that?
I think I look back at what would I tell my younger self? Like, what if I could go back and have a conversation with myself? It would definitely be this idea of don't put so much pressure on yourself. Like, you are going to fail, you are going to make mistakes.
Mhm.
You just got to be able to get up, dust yourself off and get back into the fight, give it another go. But I was not like that growing up. I was really hard on myself. I put a lot of pressure on myself. And, it's pressure that other people didn't put on me. It was pressure that I put on myself. And so this idea of failing forward is something that I have learned over time, because to me, it's not easy, because I think failure and mistakes are still painful. It's still painful to this day, but I've realized that you can't stay there. You've got to continue to learn from it and move on from it. For me, that idea has grown from becoming a pilot, of this idea of, you make a mistake, you can't stay there, you have to learn from it and then move on. And we do a debrief after every mission, so that we talk about our mistakes. They're very open. You can't hide your mistakes. Everybody's going to know about it. You're going to talk about it. You're going to drill down into the root cause, and then you're going to figure out what to do differently the next time. And so it helps kind of normalize mistakes, and to use them as learning. You ideally, you knock those mistakes out in training so they don't happen in combat. But it's this idea of just, putting in the work, knowing that you're going to make mistakes, you're going to fail at some point, but how do you learn from it? How do you learn from it so that you don't do it again? And then, to me, that next step, though, is then you share that with other people. It's one thing to learn the idea, the lesson yourself, but when you can share it, which is sometimes hard, right? Because it means you have to tell people you made a mistake. But I think that helps make the team better. It helps make other people better. But I'm a huge proponent of that.
Yeah, KC, I know we're getting close on our time, but the one thing that I love about your unique message and your unique story, in fact, it's the title of your book, Flying in the Face of Fear. And in the talks that I've heard, in preparing for this, you were very open about, hey, look, it's okay to be fearful, and you can be courageous at the same time. And I love what you said. Fear is an emotion, courage is a choice. But I think that's unique about your message. And I maybe I blame it on the ego. They're not out there going, hey, I'm afraid, but there's, and I've been down the path recently, as Rob knows, where I left the airlines a couple of years ago. And that's the first moment in a while that I was like, I am really afraid of some things. And they weren't like jumping off of a bridge into, it wasn't a physical fear. It was like,
Right.
I'm afraid of this transition in life. And I didn't even know it, so I love that message that you have really resonates with me. And I think with our clients, in the financial world, retirement is scary. These transitions are very scary. So I think, I love that message that you have.
Yeah, that did not come as an immediate lesson, right? These are things that over time I've realized, there have been a lot of moments where I've been scared, and you're right. It's not that those big, it's not the flying a jet over Baghdad scared. It's not life or death scared. It's, you're starting a new job, your fear of failure, right? Or not meeting expectations, fear of not being good enough. I mean, it's the transition between military to civilian, or from one career to another. It's scary because it's a new environment and you want to do well, you want to succeed. To me, it's like those feelings are normal, but you can't stay there. You got to step up, you got to take action, you got to get beyond the fear and act with courage. And that's really what matters the most, is what you do in that moment.
I love that you have this book out there. Thank you, first of all, for writing down those experiences, journaling them so you could refer back.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us wish we journaled more, which is a great habit. I think you have. But for sharing that story to pass it on, and just like you said there, these lessons and stories in the book, they just translate to almost every job out there. It's not just flying. Like all those lessons, you should probably be doing those in any job that you do, especially, the financial world is obviously easy and organic to put that in, but I'm not going to give it away, but I love the story about your test experience with the A10A and the A10C. Go read the book. That one had me chuckling for sure, as it will pretty much everyone. So
yeah. Casey, I'm going to get the book and read it. I've got 3 girls, so we're going to go through and read some of it together. And
I
so
love
that's
that.
gonna be
I
fun.
love
Yeah,
it.
it'll be
Thank
awesome.
you.
yeah. And again, the book is Flying in the Face of Fear, A Fighter Pilot's Lessons on Leading with Courage. It's for sale on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Where else do you want them to go look for it?
Oh, it's
Casey?
wherever your favorite bookseller is, right? You
Oh,
can
good. Okay.
order it from just about anywhere right now.
Are you going to do an Audible version of it?
It will be out on ebook and Audible. The Audible will take just a little bit longer, but it will be out on ebook, the hard copy, and then eventually on Audible as well.
My wife's an author, and she went through the Audible phase, so I understand the timing of that. Are you going to read it yourself, or did you hire someone for that?
No, we're going to have somebody else read it. So
okay.
It's a solid amount of time away from the family and away from the kids. So I will let the experts handle it.
That's your second, right? You got Aiming Higher, right?
Yes, that was a book that I did with 5 pilots, or 5 of us. And so it's more just short articles and stories. That one was, it's always, I think, easier when you do things as a team, right? It felt, it was nice to have them as we launched that book. That's why this next book feels very vulnerable, because it is my stories and lessons, and it's very exciting, but it also, I'm nervous too, I'll be honest, right? It's that whole excitement and nervousness about something, just a common repeated feeling throughout my life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, you got a couple of good reviews from us for sure.
Awesome.
I'll try to make them coherent, but how do people follow you? I know you've got the Twitter. You're pretty big on Twitter. Ask the Fighter Pilot Friday.
Yes. The Twitter's relatively new for me. I mean, social media in all reality is relatively new, but LinkedIn is probably another big area. KC Campbell. There are a lot of Kim Campbells out there. On Twitter, it's at KC Hogg, HAWG 987. Hogg is short for Warthog, and 987 is the A10 that I flew on April 7th. So there's a little special meaning there. And
you
then,
got the tail behind you there. That's
yeah,
awesome.
I do. That is a small piece of the airplane. Once they decided it couldn't fly again, they offered to cut a small piece out for me.
Wow.
It's been an honor, just an absolute honor to have you on the show, of course. Any books or documentaries that are out there, any form of communication that you would suggest our listeners read or consume?
I am a big fan of Brene Brown and Simon Sinek. I love the book Dare to Lead, Start with Why. I mention them in my book as well, because I think to me, they had definitely an influential impact on my life, just in terms of my beliefs, and especially this idea of being brave and afraid at the same time that Brene Brown talks about. It almost gave me permission that it was okay for me as a fighter pilot, a female fighter pilot, a wife, a mom, a leader, to be able to stand up and say, yeah, I was scared in that moment, but you know what? It was okay because I took action. So that book was very powerful for me. And so probably the one that I would recommend the most. And then Simon Sinek, I think, is amazing, because it goes back to finding your purpose, finding your passion, what's most important in your life, and then how will you make an impact and a difference.
I love it. I've got it right up there somewhere. I was trying to find it. But, yeah.
So mine is somewhere over there as well.
Yes. Any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners, or anything you want to say to young women or men out there?
I would love if people have additional questions, or maybe something that we didn't cover, to please reach out via social media is probably the easiest way. You can also link up with me on my website, which is kim-kc-campbell.com. But I have a link to connect with me there. So I really try to answer those questions, especially if people are interested specifically about flying or doing different things in their lives and kind of the path that I took. I'm happy to share those lessons because I think so many people helped me on my journey. And so this is a way for me to give back and help other people on their journey as well.
Awesome. Well, it's been an honor to have you on the show. Thanks again. This show, we talked about all kinds of things.
Yeah, we
to
did.
include your habits, journaling, putting in the work, practice, chair fly, plan for contingencies, control what you can control. Obviously, if you fall down, get up, dust yourself off, get back in the fight. I love that. And you can reach you at kim-kc-campbell.com. Go buy the book right now. It's available on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or like you said, anywhere, probably your favorite bookstore there. Flying in the Face of Fear, a fighter pilot's lessons on leading with courage. Again, kind of the bottom line for me on that book, it's just for anyone who's looked up at the sky and thought, wow, that's pretty cool. So go get the book. We love quotes. I know you like quotes. The book's filled with some awesome quotes. So we've got 3. Usually we only do 2, but this book warrants 3. The first one's the first quote in your book from Nelson Mandela. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. Brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. What a great first quote for the book, because the book's filled with that. The second one's Martin Luther King Jr. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in the moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. And the last one is from Kim KC Campbell. Fear can prevent us from achieving success, or it can lead us to a greater path of growth and change if we harness it effectively. So as hard as it may be, we need to have the courage to persevere through challenges, do the hard things, and take action even in the face of fear. That's it. We've reached the final destination of Flight 51 with Kim KC Campbell. Thanks again, KC, for being on the show. And if you like the show and the podcast, go on to Apple iTunes or wherever you listen to it and subscribe. And remember, as Emerson says, the world makes way for those who know where they're going. And as I say, so plan accordingly. From all of us at the Pilot Money Guy and Gals, we wish you smooth rides in South Atlantic. Thanks.
Leading Edge Financial Planning, LLC is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Leading Edge Financial Planning and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. For additional information, please visit our website at www.leadingedgeplanning.com. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, and it should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security. It does not take into account any investor's particular investment objectives, strategies, tax status, or investment horizon. You should consult your attorney or tax advisor. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change based on market and other conditions. These documents may contain certain statements that may be deemed forward-looking statements. Please note that any such statements are not guarantees of any future performance, and actual results or developments may differ materially from these projected. Any projections, market outlooks, or estimates are based upon certain assumptions and should not be construed as indicative of actual events that will occur. All information has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but its accuracy is not guaranteed. There is no representation or warranty as to the current accuracy, reliability, or completeness of, nor liability for, decisions based on such information, and it should not be relied on as such.